Welcome to Vandy on SI. I'm Joey Dwyer. Another big night for Vanderbilt basketball. Mark Byington has landed his second commitment in the 2026 class. It's four-star big man Jackson Sheffield. And man, what a good weekend it was for Vanderbilt basketball when Vanderbilt football took down Charleston Southern. You could glance at the opposing sideline before the game, and you saw Ethan Mbako over there, and also Jackson Sheffield, two guys who kind of stuck out on Vanderbilt's recruiting board and really, I think have stuck out to Vanderbilt the whole process now. It's Mark Byington's first two four-star commits, and I think Sheffield is particularly notable when you consider that I think he adds a dimension to Vanderbilt's recruiting that hasn't necessarily had, which is landing a high caliber big man who I think others were after. It was down to them and Buzz Williams in Maryland. And Vanderbilt finds a way to win the recruitment. I think that's a big deal. And I think the reason more so than anything is you look at the scheme, and I think Jackson Sheffield really can thrive in Mark Byington's scheme. And not to say he couldn't do it elsewhere, but I just think he's a particularly good fit at Vanderbilt, and I think that will allow him to unlock a lot more of his game than maybe he could have elsewhere. So I think from that standpoint, good decision for him. But for Vanderbilt, I think they've got to like it too. Just Sheffield only averaged 5.8 points on the UIBL circuit, and obviously it was a factor there, but really didn't stand out all that much. He was kind of the second big man behind Tennessee freshman Dwayne Brown at Hoover High School, but a guy, and I think this kind of embodies his, I guess, workload to this point. He was the second big man on that team, right? That team was 35 and 0. I think he impacts winning in a lot of ways, and that's kind of a microcosm of it. Sheffield really, I don't know if he'll ever be a volume scorer. I think the UIBL circuit maybe showed you that a little bit. Maybe Hoover High School showed you that too. But I think he can really run a dunk. I think he can really play out of the pick and roll. And I think that's a big deal for a guy like that to not only be able to do that, but have an offense where that's encouraged and where that's the type of big that they're looking for. He's 6'9", doesn't look 6'9" to me, and I think he's springy enough and athletic enough to maybe make up for that a little bit. But again, I don't think he's going to be a super high volume scorer. I don't know that that's necessarily his game. I think that's all right for where Vanderbilt currently sits, though. I don't know that Vanderbilt's biggest scorers are ever necessarily going to be the bigs because I don't think they want a big man who they're going to have to dump it down to and commit 10 or 15 shots to a game. It almost reminds me of a guy like Dylan Cardwell, who was at Auburn and did so many little things right. It impacted winning in so many different ways. And he didn't have to score 20 points a game to do it. He could start alongside Janai Broome last year. He could come off the bench, which he did earlier in his career. And those are the type of guys that I think impact winning a lot in the SEC. And to me, gone are the days where you have to have a big where you can dump it down to all the time. I think you want a guy who you can give it to and he can get a bucket, but I don't think Vanderbilt wants that to be the way that it wins. I don't think it wants to play through a guy who's going to generate most of the scoring through the post. I think Sheffield's capable enough of doing it. I think he can maybe get off one or two bounces once in a while, and that'll kind of be the extent of that. But a really good dunker, I think, really effective on the dunker's post, really effective in transition. I think he can really run the floor. Run and dunk is almost it's almost offensive to say that about a big man, but I think that's almost what Vanderbilt's looking for, especially with a guy who has a good frame and seems like a good fit with what they want to do. Otherwise, they don't need him to be Ethan Mbako and go score 20 points a game, which I've heard the expectations are pretty high in terms of what Ethan Mbako is going to give them as a scorer. I don't know that that's the case with Sheffield as much. Honestly, that's okay for them at this point. Not everybody's going to be able to score 20 points or do all those things, but I think the athleticism speaks for itself. I think the scheme fit is really a big deal here and really is applicable in Sheffield's case. And then obviously a guy who's a winner, maybe his impact will come on the defensive end more than anything. I've seen him described as a defense first big, and I guess at this point I'd kind of have to agree. I think there is some ceiling offensively. He's not going to play on the perimeter. Really didn't have a great summer as a free throw shooter. I think that's probably the biggest aspect of his game they're going to have to improve. Otherwise, teams are going to foul him pretty consistently and just hope that he misses. But as of now, I think he really liked the defensive traits. He can really move his feet. I don't think he gets enough credit for his athleticism, frankly. I think he's really springy. I think he's a really explosive athlete, especially around the rim. And I think that helps Vanderbilt a lot. But again, he's mobile, so I guess I don't know, think he'll get blown by all the time in ball screens. I think that's a big deal too. Um, Here's the thing on Sheffield though. Um, Again, he's not going to be on the perimeter. He's not going to be a commanding force. Not everybody's got to be that though. And I think if he can impact the game defensively early on, I think that's a big deal. And I think his frame is ready to go in order to do that. I think he had naturally has a little bit of a thicker frame than a guy normally that you'd see his size, and I think he moves well enough to where that's kind of masked, where you don't see, man, he's really physical or anything along those lines. But I think he is thick enough and physical enough to hold up. Maybe not in the SEC right away, but I think the additions they're going to have to do to that are not going to be all that crazy or all that huge. I think he has a body that is ready enough to be close to playing right away. And I think that's a big deal for Vanderbilt basketball as well, that they're going to kind of embrace. But again, the fit just, I think, is really a solid one. Not that he couldn't have done anything with Maryland or Buzz Williams. I just think if he wanted to maximize his impact on winning, I think this is probably the place for him to go. And I think it's one of those things where Mark Byington has kind of put the scheme over just accumulating a bunch of talent. Not to say that Sheffield's not talented, but he's not a guy that has lofty scoring numbers or anything along those lines. Yet I think he's a guy that they had at their top of the top of their board, just because I think they thought he was a guy that could really help them in a lot of ways, particularly as a guy who fits the system. So that's the big deal for me there. I don't think it's a flash you get or one in 5 years that Vanderbilt fans are going to be talking about. Man, he's on the top of the program's all-time scoring list, but I think it's a good enough one to where if they're winning a lot of games in 2 or 3 years, you can point to Jackson Sheffield as the guy who's going to help that, and it's really going to be a nice piece of what they're trying to do. I think in a lot of ways is the dirty work big guy that they looked for last year and didn't have. If they had him on that team, a more developed version of him, I think that's a pretty big deal and kind of changes the outlook of their season. Vanderbilt going from here, I think has a chance to still build a really strong 2026 class. Obviously, two four-stars have started out. I don't know if they're desperate to add another guy. I think they're going to continue to go after guys. Obviously, Aziz Olajuwon is a name. Trent Perry's a name. That I think they're in the mix for. Dakari Spear, they're in the mix for as well. Again, I don't know that if they miss on those guys or miss on Gage Mayfield, that they're really gonna go and try to do what I guess the Jerry Stackhouse staffs in the past have done and try to accumulate a bunch of guys in the spring window that haven't been signed yet. I think they're going to be pretty picky here, and I think they're in a position to do that. Especially maybe they'll lose some guys in the spring, right? I still think that they're going to be pretty picky with high school guys, and they're probably going to look to the portal a little more from there. That's kind of the indication I've got, but I still don't really think they know how big of a high school class they're going to get. They're going to give these guys a run, and we'll go from there. But for Vandy on SI, I'm Joey Dwyer. Thanks for watching. God bless. We'll talk soon. Peace.